It's certainly interesting to hear a juxtaposition of different kinds of contemporary music, also historical music, in the same concert like this. We've had some different types of world music as well as early music and jazz. And as a musicologist, I find all this very interesting. But at the center of it stands the instrument itself, the fortepiano. Tonight we have an original, but frequently one hears in concerts modern copies of various types. And Rembrandt was kind enough to provide me with some questions which he wanted to direct at Richard, who is coming from the, let's say, more conventional early music background, as am I. But I would like to turn it around and just pose a few of these questions to open the discussion to Rembrandt, who, as I understand it, is coming from a jazz background. So, Rembrandt, why recently did you become interested in the fortepiano? How did you come to know about it? What attracted you to it as a musician, and how does it figure in your current aesthetic?
Actually, the idea to start playing with the fortepiano, funny enough, came from our drummer, whom you have seen playing now. Originally, indeed, I'm a jazz player, or a jazz trio, and I usually play on Steinways and modern pianos. And then, with our love for Middle Eastern music, we had many projects playing with people from the Middle East. So, people on the Arabic lute, the Arabic flute, qanun, all these instruments. And I think what connects most instruments from the Middle East is that they have a very, what I say, human sound and a human sound level. In other words, they're actually very soft. So if you go to any classical Arabic music or Persian music group playing, it's actually always chamber music, and it's set for rather small rooms, and it's not like as loud as many Western European instruments. So after many times when we played with guests from the Middle East, they said like, well, it's great to play with this trio, but the Steinway is so loud, it totally pushes away my instrument, albeit the lutes or the flutes or whatever. And then I remember being in the car with Vincent back from one of the concerts, and then he pitched the idea, why don't we once try a fortepiano, you know? Of course we all knew that it's a softer sound and a more, maybe closer to the human voice, and that's where the adventure for me started, actually. But that's at least the reason why.
Okay. Is there any sense in which authenticity is a concern, or are you completely divorced from the original reason that the fortepiano was revived by the pioneers of early music in the, I guess, late 50s, early 60s?
Yeah, I think what we do with it, I mean, now still, I want to learn, of course, about the instrument, and my wife being a classical singer, and her uncle, Jos van Veldhoven from the Bach Society, of course, I talked with them, and I know what the fortepiano usually is used for, but for us, really, the interest came because of the sound of the instrument, and not so much of, well, at least what I learned from people like Barton Orts or Ronald Rautgam, or not so much about the music that fits to the piano, you know what I mean? So, for me, I approached this instrument as a new instrument, as were it built yesterday, and actually the Mana fortepiano which I have was built last month. So for me, it's a very modern instrument. Along the way in this process, of course, I do start listening more to actual historically oriented fortepiano music. But for me, that's totally not the goal to play what Richard is doing now, or Barton Orts. I want to write, like, as I mentioned, film music, my own music, improvise with Bach. And also, I have a mission for the art music of the Middle East, to bring it here and to show people how beautiful this music is. And I feel even this Broadwood, which for me is totally new, really fits well to this music as well, apart from Haydn and Beethoven and Mozart.
Richard, for you, he's jumping after playing. For you, what is the future of the fortepiano? It's a question that is a concern to me as well. Do you see it as remaining central to the classical tradition? Do you expect to or hope to see more modern pianists learning about the fortepiano, learning about historical performance practice?
I think it's a hugely important tool to discover. For me, I think it's a little bit the same. I don't play the instrument because it's correct. I play the instrument because it informs me about the music that was written for it. To play Haydn or Mozart on a good original instrument from the time, or even Bach on a good organ from his time, or a good harpsichord from his time, or Svelingon, by playing the music on a tool that the composer would have recognized, you can learn all sorts of things about color and shaping of the music. So it's more of a tool to learn, and it's a hugely important thing for education. And one of the things I do at the conservatory is give the modern pianists classes, repertoire classes, where I force them mercilessly to play harpsichord and all of the different kinds of fortepiano that we have available to us, also from the Sveling collection that we use at the conservatory. And it's amazing how open they are to what I have to tell them about what I find important about these instruments and what it can tell us.
Regarding the future of classical music in general, Rembrandt, how do you see this playing out? Do you have a definition of classical music? Do you see it as a hermetic, closed cultural space, like what we're familiar with hearing at the Concertgebouw, for example, the standard repertoire, the standard performance practice, the standard cultural experience? Are you in any way trying to break through that and incorporate elements of classical music into your own concert activity? How does that work for you?
Yeah, originally, of course, not coming from classical music, at least some things amaze me about the infrastructure of classical music. For instance, just last week we read the Volkskrant newspaper, and or if you read, for instance, the Luister magazine or these music magazines, there's a rather big difference between the jazz magazines and the classical magazines. What amazes me, probably it has a reason, of course, but I wouldn't mind if this changes. That if you read any reviews from classical CDs, then first, for instance, it would say, in this case, Dussek, and then you need to find, it's Richard Egarr playing, okay, nice, and then you see Mozart, and then, okay, this performer. And in the practice that we are in as improvising musicians, one of the most important things is that on almost all of our concerts we play our own work, which of course, I think if you'd have a time machine and you jump back to Mozart's time, he also was a guy that plays his own music on an extremely high level, but the basics is the same. And sometimes it amazes me a little bit that if you read these review things, that the review is more about the composition and the composer than about the artist. And what I found very interesting with this a couple of series that we're going to do next year with Lisa Verstman on violin and Remy van Kesteren on harp and Dominic Seldis on bass, is that we want to try to invite them to join us, but also for the public that shows up to be more interested in these classical musicians as artists themselves instead of what they play. At least that's how I approach it. I like Lisa's playing, the violin player, probably you know her. So I would go to her concert anyway, whatever she plays. I love her sound, I love the things she does. So for me, it's totally unnecessary to provide me with the repertoire that she's going to be playing. If she's going to be playing Bach or Bartok or whatever. To exaggerate a little bit, I wouldn't care so much because I'm interested in the musician of Lisa. And these kind of discussions I have with my wife quite a lot on the kitchen table, because of course she is in the classical infrastructure and I'm not. Although she's also improvising and I'm playing some more classical notes. So yeah, it's these kind of things that just strike me as a jazz and improvising musician.
Well, somewhat atypically, Richard is also quite active with improvisation. He's a vastly experienced continuo player, but he's also made live recordings of improvisations, I think on your Handel organ concerti recording of preluding and other practices which actually continued into the 20th century, into the recorded era, but then subsequently dropped out again. I'll let you respond, right now. But how important, Richard, do you think your activity as an improviser is going to continue to be, and do you hope to expand that, and do you hope to see a broader revival of improvised music in the classical sphere we were just talking about?
I think there's certainly more of that going on. I mean, certainly within the Fortepiano world, Bob Levin does incredible stuff with improvisations. I mean, he can really improvise, pretty much improvise Mozart. The question is, should he improvise Mozart or should he improvise Levin?
Right.
But there are a number of fortepianists around now who have the courage to basically take your trousers off in public and see what happens by improvising. It's something I do in Mozart concertos or piano concertos when I play them. I don't play cadenzas necessarily by Mozart or whoever. I will make them up on the spot, and it's very scary, but it's a kind of good scary, and things go wrong, and that's part of the excitement, is how you get out of those things. I often say, when one of the great, well, if you're a Keith Jarrett fan, I don't know whether you're a Keith Jarrett fan, but there are wonderful moments in Keith Jarrett where things change. You can hear the process where maybe a note is hit by a mistake and he picks it up and actually works with it. And that's a very exciting part of performance, and it's a very important part of performing old music. And music really went terribly, terribly wrong in about 1920, when music stopped being tonal, and Schoenberg happened. Common gestures which any person could, natural gestures, natural ideas of harmony and musical gesture, just went out the window. And that's when classical music started having serious trouble. And it's no coincidence, I was talking to my daughter about this at lunch today, it's no coincidence that's when you get that whole world of musical training, improvising, which used to be in classical music, that becomes something else. That becomes jazz. That becomes popular music. It just goes to another place. So I strongly believe that when, in 100 years' time, when they write the history of the 20th century, what people will consider the classical music of the 20th century is not just, obviously, the great classical composers of the 20th century like Stravinsky, well, we won't go there. But I think that the classical music will also be considered the great jazz players, the great pop musicians of the 20th century as well. I think that's where music is alive, and really alive in the 20th century.
Yeah, for real.
I think Erin wanted us to keep this to about 10 minutes. Any final thoughts on the future of art music? Does it have a place with all the technological changes that have come about and the changes in society, the way people consume music, whether or not they attend concerts of the type of concerts they attend? Do you see a future for art music, and do you think you're contributing to that?
Well, we can only hope that we're contributing, but I guess myself, being a consumer on Spotify and YouTube as well, I think nothing beats being there live yourself, and the kind of music that we're in is different every night. So when we play my compositions or jazz standards or this Bach material, indeed the audience knows that we're improvising. So I think this interhuman kind of thing going back and forth of you guys realizing that tonight for me is rather exciting, because I've never touched the piano before, and you can see us work and struggle, and that's also part of the fun, I guess. I mean, if you would buy any CD which is all very well produced, you know what you're going to get, and then you might just watch YouTube or whatever. But I think the live experience of seeing all these musicians play live and make their mistakes and being human beings, I think it will continue for a couple of thousand more years, I guess.
Richard?
No, I totally agree. I mean, you're about to hear Anna and I do some songs by Dussek and Haydn, and the artists I always enjoy working with the most are the people who you never quite know what's going to happen. And that's certainly the case with Anna and myself. There's a freedom. It's not the same kind of improvisatory freedom that is being talked about in jazz, but there is a freedom of decisions that we can make on the spot, timing and dynamics. Those kinds of things are what's very, very important in live performance. If things are fixed, they are dead. So let's see what happens.
Well, Richard, Rembrandt, thank you both very much for your comments and ideas, and also for your very live, very improvised music.
Thank you, you're welcome.
Sure. Please.
Well, very interesting. I think it helps a lot if you improvise. I'm a pianist of 20th century music, and I just want to say that this afternoon I heard the premiere of a piece by Teo Wendy, who is a jazz performer, and he just has written, he's 84, a most beautiful opera, which was very touching, and he has a great experience in improvisation. So we have a lot of improvisers who write composed music, which is something different because it's all written down and thought of. And when you improvise, you thought, but it is on the spot. It gives a lot of freedom. But that, I think that is a very good combination. I would like to say that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Further? That's it.